Welcome back to the Bourbon Note, everybody. I'm Ben. Here's my top 5 things I'm loving about bourbon right now. So a couple weeks ago, I released a video of the top 5 things that I'm kind of sick of in bourbon right now. And I don't want to be just throwing negativity out there. So here's 5 things I'm actually super excited about in bourbon right now. And the first one is, bam, availability. So recently, I think most people have probably noticed that some of these products, particularly Buffalo Trace, but a lot of other brands too, are starting to become more available on shelves. And I think that's great. If you're not a fan of Buffalo Trace, I talked about this in the last video about the things that I was, kind of over in bourbon. If you're not into Buffalo Trace, then this probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you. But if you are a person who just genuinely actually does like Buffalo Trace products, it's been very frustrating that these products got so overhyped, so, just overhyped, I guess, that's the only word for it, that they ended up on secondary markets. They ended up, I know some of these are produced in limited quantities, but, there should be enough out there that this shouldn't have happened to begin with. I got a lot of comments about my Buffalo Trace takes in the last videos. People saying, Buffalo Trace purposely makes less whiskey just to drive demand up. There's maybe some truth to that. I'm not saying there isn't, but there's also a whole lot of truth to the distribution, in the 3-tier system and the consumer side of it. People buying these bottles, hoarding them, and then flipping them. So I actually picked up this bottle just sitting on the shelf at about retail. It was a municipal store that tends to run maybe 10, 12% higher than most other stores anyway. So I got this for $70, I think, out the door. It was like 65 or something like that. So, I was happy to pay that for it because I am a person who genuinely likes just the base model Buffalo Trace products. I like Eagle Rare. I like, E.H. Taylor Small Batch. I love Antique 107. And so for me, it's very frustrating that those products are just not available because of all the hype surrounding Buffalo Trace as a brand. And then you get into the individual mash bills. Weller is saying mash bill is Pappy. So of course, all the Wellers taste like Pappy. So everybody, buys those up. But I think it's a combination of 2 things. Buffalo Trace's expansion has, started to yield some results. And it's also, we've talked a lot about the bourbon boom being over. That was a big conversation, a few months ago. And I think people are just starting to realize that while these are good products, they're not anything you need to be, purchasing for 4 times the MSRP on the secondary market. And so I think some of that is starting to kind of show, and these products are starting to sit around. What I love about this is that I'm not seeing liquor stores take advantage of people the way that they used to. Some of them are still doing it, but I think that's going to go by the wayside. I'm not a fan of people flipping whiskey and putting it on the secondary market, but I guess if somebody buys it and somebody wants to buy it off of them, make a gentleman's agreement, that's their business. But it just always pissed me off when I saw a liquor store doing that, because that liquor store didn't pay the extra price to get that bottle. They may have had to buy a bunch of Fireball or whatever, but I don't know. That just always pissed me off, and I never liked to support stores that did that. So I'm happy to see that going away. So number 2 on the list here is actually a result. The next 2 are kind of results of this first one. It's kind of a cascading thing here. And the next 2 I think are positives, but they may come across as me throwing out a little bit of shade and negativity. And that is the flippers going away. I am happy to see these people that are, would wait in lines and buy up all these bottles and sell them for 5 times the price or whatever. That seems to be on its way out. Now, there's always going to be bottles that people are going to do that with. There's always going to be super rare ones, especially like the hyper-aged stuff. You get your Pappies, you get your, your BTAC, stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is, the BTAC, a lot of that stuff is aged like 15, 18 years or whatever. It's not like they can just mass produce that. But as a result of those products becoming so popular, it trickled down to these products. And flippers were able to actually go out, wait in line, go to distilleries, get a hold of a bunch of these, and then turn around and just, again, sell them for 5 times what they paid for them. And so while the availability of these is coming online, I think it's going to get rid of those people that were doing that. Again, they're always going to be able to do it with the super rare stuff, but I'm glad that that's seemingly no longer going to trickle down to these products that I think everybody should be able to enjoy. You know, I always think, you know, bourbon is a good thing to share with people. It's something that I don't think it should be just for either rich people that have a lot of money or people that are just willing to, I don't know, buy bottles on credit card debt and just throw money around to buy. You know, I mean, bourbon should be for everyone. And I think, you know, I guess that, again, those super rare ones are always going to be expensive. But yeah, I'm just glad it's not affecting the rest of the market the way it has. So, you know, there are still people coming into bourbon right now that are new to it. And, you know, they'll get to enjoy these products the way that, you know, a few years ago maybe, you know, we weren't able to. And I think that's great. And they can get a hold of them without getting ripped off or taken advantage of. So I think that that's awesome. So number 3, again, the kind of cascading from that first one, the availability. I'm really excited to see if this just gets rid of the people flexing on social media. If you follow any sort of like bourbon groups on Facebook, or you follow, you know, whatever pages on Instagram, you know, following a page on Instagram is one thing because that's just the person who owns the page posting pictures. But if you get into like the bourbon groups on Facebook, the amount of, you know, the flex pictures where somebody will post a picture, you know, they'll either do the classic thing that everybody makes fun of, what's the crotch shot, where they're sitting in the driver's seat and they've got the bottle sitting in their crotch, and they make sure that they include the Mercedes album on their steering wheel, and then they strategically have their watch in the picture. Just douchebag 101. Maybe some of that stuff will start going away with higher availability of these otherwise hard to get products. So, you know, maybe some of that stuff. And then, like, I remember, like, I would always see these pictures that people would post where it was like the front seat of their car, they got a Blanton's Gold, they've got a couple of Weller store picks, 2 Stag Juniors, and a couple of E.H. Taylors. Like, hey, today was a good day, found these on the shelf. It's like, no, you didn't. You maybe found them on the shelf, but you didn't find those at MSRP all in one day. There's no chance I believe that. I don't care what market you're in. And I have literally seen pictures that were that egregious, where there's like 6, 8, 10 bottles, you know, of all super allocated stuff. And so I think that maybe, you know, now that a lot of the bottles that would have normally been in those kind of pictures are going to be more available, you know, you just don't have to put up with seeing that shit anymore. Not that it really affects anything, but it's just funny to me, that people would just do that to begin with. Like, just, I don't know. I've just always thought it was douchey. So I'm just happy to see that stuff just go out the window. So anyway, again, I realize this last 2 were maybe a little negative towards certain groups of people, but it's a net positive for the overall bourbon, you know, kind of, I guess, community, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, getting back to some positive things about just bourbon in general that I'm very excited about. And this one, I actually might get some pushback from people, because I know some people are getting sick of this, but I'm actually excited about the experimenting that's going on with bourbon. You know, there's been a lot of experimenting with finishing bourbons and doing interesting stuff with it. I think that that's a net positive. And I know some people are just kind of sick of seeing, you know, another, you know, cigar batch, you know, where it's finished in 5 different things and blended together or whatever. But a lot of times those are actually really good bourbons. And I think with one thing that I love about bourbon is, you know, the very, very strict rules as far as quality control and the way it has to be made. I think that that's a net good for bourbon, because it keeps quality in the product. You know, when you have to do 51% corn, when you have to abide by, you know, the distillation proof and barrel entry proof, all those things are good because they provide good boundaries to keep this product within. But it also does put up a lot of walls where it's like, okay, well, how much differential can you get between products when you have so much, you know, so many rules surrounding it? And so this is kind of a way to not necessarily break the rules, but just kind of maybe bend them a little bit and experiment a little bit more. And finishing bourbon is nothing new. You've had brands doing it for a while. It definitely has gotten much more popular because I think, you know, brands are just looking for something unique and original to bring to the market. I think that's a net positive. The reason I don't mind it and the reason I'm not sick of it and the reason I'm not sick of so many brands doing it is because if I don't want those things, I can still go just buy whatever non-finished bourbon. It's not like they're taking away other products. I think that maybe distilleries are making room with extra stock to maybe make some finished products. But to be honest, it's not really like the legacy distilleries so much that are doing it. I think it's a lot of smaller brands that are sourcing. And I think it makes sourcing a lot more fun. They can take a product that's good already, but then maybe add some sort of a different layer to it. And again, I just think that that's a net positive. I know people are kind of getting sick of the Amberana thing, and Amberana is a very aggressive finishing, so I get that that was not everybody's cup of tea. It wasn't necessarily fully my cup of tea, but I'm not mad about the fact that it's out there because again, that doesn't take away from, I can still go buy Wild Turkey products. I can still go buy Jim Beam or Jack Daniel's products. I can get Heaven Hill products. And most of those are not gonna be finished. I just think it's fun that, with all the sourcing going on, like I kind of, yapped about in my last video, it gives those companies kind of an avenue to do a little something extra. So I just think that that's a net positive and it's a little more fun. So anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about that one. I figured I might get a little bit of pushback about that. But again, just because some brands that are sourcing are doing some interesting different things doesn't mean they're taking away all those other brands that you love. You can just go drink those. Everything's gonna be fine. So the last one that I'm super excited about, I think nobody is gonna push back on this, at least I hope not, and that's the general bourbon community. So with all the talk recently about the bourbon bust, happening, the boom is over, is whiskey tube dying? There is some of that. I mean, the channel has, my channel in particular has continued to grow. Sometimes it grows a little faster, sometimes it gets a little stagnant. It kind of ebbs and flows, but there's always been net growth. And some channels are growing very, very quickly right now. And I think that that's kind of indicative of the fact that, well, maybe some of the boom is over, the boom that kind of came out of COVID and, the popularity skyrocketed, these allocated rare stuff skyrocketed. People got into it just for the flipping, like I talked about earlier. With a lot of that going away, I think the community is a little more refined now. And what I love about this community and, my viewers, the people that I see in the chat, in the live streams all the time, the people that I see in the comments all the time, the ride or die folks that continue to watch the channel, I love to continue to see that engagement because those people are not here because of some boom in popularity. They're not here because this is, the new trend like a lot of people were a few years ago. And I think that that's great because I think that maybe, well, some channels have gone away and that's been a little disappointing. There's some channels that are no longer around that I actually really liked. There are still people getting into this and there are still people starting out new channels. And there are still people that are, being passionate about, loving this whole bourbon thing. And I think the combination of all the other stuff that's going on with the availability and with the experimentation is just gonna be another thing that kind of complements this whole new thing of like the people that are still here, that are still appreciating it, and the new people that are coming in and appreciating it. So I think that overall, all these things are gonna work together well to kind of take this community in a really positive direction. And I think that, one of the things that I've always loved about doing this channel, my favorite thing about doing this channel has been the community. It has been the friends that I've met, the other channels that I interact with, that we do live streams together, that I'm legitimately friends with now. It's the people that, I hear from in the comments all the time, like I said earlier, that are always in the live streams. The people that are always giving me extra information in the comments. If I'm talking about bourbon and I've got questions about it, there's, people I can always count on to give me the information. Sugar Kitty, I'm looking your way. But there's a lot of people that do, and that's the fun thing about this. It's this ongoing conversation that we're all having about this one thing that we're passionate about, this one thing that we love that has really, really done a lot to bring a lot of people together, I think. And so, I'm just really excited to see where this continues to go, how the community kind of evolves around the evolving market of bourbon. So I'm very excited about that. Let me know if you guys feel the same way. Let me know if you feel the same way or if you disagree with any of these things on the list. This has been my top 5 things that I'm excited about in bourbon. I'm Ben. This is the Bourbon Note. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you on the next one.